folks, hello and welcome back to online English class. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to continue our essay drafting process for the quarter 4 essay. We're going to be looking in a little more detail at this sample essay, and we're going to be thinking about some of these focus points that I'm going to be evaluating your essay according to. Before we get into that, let's just quickly run back through the top of the week announcements. First and foremost, make sure that you are completing your discussion grade procedure on a daily basis. Second, make sure that you are engaging in the drafting process actively throughout the course of this week. If you are not doing that, then you are not participating in the course appropriately. Okay, you are failing to do what you have been asked to do, and therefore it would follow that you should not do well on your essay. Okay, so you should be working through the drafting process actively through the course of this week. That is something that I've told you to do. That's something that is in our goals for this week. So I really hope that you are working through that drafting process so that you can have a draft of that quarter 4 essay in hand by the end of this week. That would be very wise for you, okay? So for you AP students, in preparation for your May 20th exam, at the beginning of next week, we're going to be turning our attention to the preparation and review for that exam, okay? We're going to spend a solid amount of days preparing for that exam and getting ready for it, okay? So in preparation for that, make sure that you've read the 2020 AP testing guide, that you've completed the 2020 AP exam day checklist, and you've completed the testing demo for the testing experience that you'll have on the AP exam, okay? So if you're in the honors course, then you don't need to do that. If you're in the honors course, your primary job is to get your quarter 4 essay done, all right? So you can work at a perhaps a little more lax pace, okay? You can slow down your pace in your drafting, but nevertheless, it needs to be taking place, and you need to be conscientiously engaging in the process, because May 18th through May 22nd is going to show up much quicker than you would expect, all right? We're only a few weeks away from that, all right? And if you haven't gotten started on that essay, it's going to suddenly be due, and you're going to be giving me a very crappy paper, all right? Let's not do that, all right? So in pursuit of continuing this process of preparing for our quarter 4 essay, let's go ahead and take a look at the focus points that I want to think about today. Okay, so looking backwards quickly, we've already discussed adapting to the rhetorical situation, or, right, to put it another way, engaging in the writing process by generating ideas and developing a central claim that answers the prompt. Both of those are essentially the same task, okay? We've already talked about our central claim, the construction of a thesis statement. All right, that thesis statement needs to be in response to an actually contentious issue. The contentious issue is up to you to determine, up to you to respond to, okay? It is part of the process of adapting to the rhetorical situation, part of the process of engaging in the writing process by generating ideas about a prompt that tells you to conduct a synthetic argument, okay? You can't respond correctly to a synthetic argumentation prompt if you are not developing a contentious claim, okay? Everyone good with that? Cool. We then looked a little bit yesterday at the process of developing paragraphs that include claims. All right, those supporting claims ought to obviously be connected to what? The thesis. All right, if they are not clearly connected, right? If the supporting assertions in your paragraph are not clearly connected to your thesis statement, all right, then there's something wrong. Okay, if you cannot look at your essay structure and go, I know exactly what I need to say in each one of my paragraphs, it's probably because you have not reasoned through your thesis, and you should not start writing paragraphs until you know what all your paragraphs need to do. Okay, in other words, establish your line of reasoning first and then write your essay. Okay, and those paragraphs not only need to have claims, but they also need to have evidence supporting those claims that are commented on or analyzed. All right. For example, in the sample essay that we've been looking at, right, one of the claims that the student makes is that Elsa, apart from or perhaps despite the fact that she is typically considered A, harmless, or B, right, if sort of not morally neutral, then good, right? Elsa is a good influence, but more often than not, she's just probably considered, like most animated characters in Disney movies and children's fiction, just basically harmless, right? Well, the student is going to argue that A, she's not harmless, that she is indeed influential, okay? She's not Hitler, she's not going to turn your child into a monster, but she is not going to help a young girl develop a sense of self that is outwardly focused, that is committed to serving her community at the expense of herself. Okay, but rather Elsa is a character that the student that the essay argues is one who develops selfishness, a sense of self that ultimately asserts that I am perfect the way that I am. I'm fine the way I am, and I shouldn't change for anyone. Okay, so uh, you might disagree with that, but that's what the student argues here, okay? And that claim, all right, is clearly connected to her central claim as it evaluates Disney's misrepresentation of the feminine identity, and then it supports that claim with what? With evidence, right? What kind of evidence? Well, the only kind of evidence you could support that claim with, an analysis of Elsa as a character, all right? She summarizes some of the plot, right, of Frozen. She talks about Elsa and who she is. She discusses how Elsa develops and chooses things throughout the course of the plot. This is a little bit like a literary analysis character essay, right? It's simple, it's short, it's straightforward, but ultimately she comes to the conclusion that Elsa is a character who helps develop a sense of self for young women that affirms a kind of existing self-perfection, a sense that they ought not change themselves for anyone or for anyone's benefit. That's a kind of inane misunderstanding of self-respect or self-confidence or self-love. All right, that is a silly way of understanding the self. Okay, so in other words, right, the essay has claims developed in paragraphs that are supported with appropriate, relevant kinds of evidence. Okay. Now, we also yesterday talked about the overarching reasoning or organization and commentary of the line of reasoning of the argument. Okay, in the honors and regular focus points, it's the same principle, but it's in different language because of the Florida State standards. All right, it simply says to organize the essay with appropriate and varied transitions that create cohesive logical relationships between the ideas developed in the essay. Okay, that is to say the same thing that you ought to use organization to illuminate the line of reasoning in an argument. The fact that you need to create cohesive relationships in the ideas developed in the essay is the same thing as developing a well-illuminated line of reasoning. Okay, what is a line of reasoning? It is a series of assertions that builds to a valid logical conclusion. In other words, you're trying to develop cohesive relationships between the central idea of the essay, the thesis, and the smaller ideas, the smaller assertions, the smaller claims that illustrate the validity of that assertion. Okay, so how did that happen in this essay? Well, we already discussed, all right, first and foremost, it starts with the central claim, and that central claim needs to be proven in a variety of ways, okay? And the student then goes through the process in each one of her paragraphs of laying out and developing with evidence, all right, and research those claims, all right? Are Disney princesses indeed extremely influential? This paragraph right here suggests that yes, all right, using some evidence to help back up that assertion. Is their influence indeed harmful, or is it positive, right? If it is indeed important, all right, is it positive or negative? Well, then she uses two analysis, one of an older, more conservative Disney princess Aurora, and one of a more progressive, much more modern understanding of femininity and the self, and it is also negative, okay? So in other words, yes, it would seem to be harmful. And then in light of those two facts, all right, or in light of this fact, and this evaluation, the student then goes on to explain what people should do in light of it, right? Which is developed at the end of the essay in the final paragraphs, okay? So the line of reasoning, all right, is cohesive. The ideas that are discussed in each one of the paragraphs are connected logically and clearly to the central idea at stake in the essay, all right? So I want to build on this just in a little more detail. Okay, if you'll notice here in the AP language focus points, you have this statement that you need to use transitional elements to guide the reader through the line of reasoning of an argument. Okay, so this is something that good writers do. They use transitional elements to move the reader from one point to another point, or one paragraph to another paragraph. Okay, and oftentimes when students cannot figure out how to build a bridge between one point to another, it's probably because there isn't one there. All right, the points are not connected. The points are not logically coherent, and the line of reasoning needs to be reevaluated. Okay, so the same is true on the honors and regular focus points, okay? The Florida State Standards want you to be able to write varied and appropriate transitions that help create these logical relationships, okay? They want you to be able to use words, phrases, clauses, and syntactical structures to help build bridges between points, all right? So if we're going to fulfill those requirements, both for the College Board and also for the Florida State Standards, we ought to look at how to construct effective transitions. Now, very quickly, right, I could just give you a long list of transitional phrases. See, look, this is how transitions work. You say the word however sometimes, or you say the word even so every now and then, or you say the word here sometimes, okay? No, that's not how transitions work, okay? You don't just throw out transitional words and say, well, willy-nilly, right? Each transition signals a kind of logical move from one thing to another. If you say the word however, it means that you're introducing a contrast. If you say the word even so, or the phrase even so, it means that despite the fact that you've already talked about something that would seem to threaten the information that follows, that the information that follows is still more important, or still valid, or still worthy of consideration. Okay? If you say a phrase like although, you are introducing a kind of counter argument, or perhaps a concession, or perhaps some kind of contrasting idea. Okay, so in other words, all of these transitional phrases that you've heard about and talked about, right? Therefore, these kinds of transitional phrases exist in order to create logical relationships between points. So if you want to Google transitional phrases or transitional words, you can, all right, but just know that each one of them plays a logical role, that they all have a meaning that help build logical relationships between your points, all right? So, for example, all right, in the first sentence of this paragraph, the word, the last thing we should consider, or the phrase, the last thing we should consider before turning our attention to Disney's characters is the extent, all right, so that needs to be edited, is the extent to which media shapes almost every person in our culture's life, especially young people. Okay, so this phrase right here helps us transition into and focalize our attention on media's shaping of every person in our culture's lives, all right, especially young people. Okay, the student then goes on to talk about some evidence that we'll discuss a little bit later. Okay, then at the end of this paragraph, we transition into our analysis, right? As promised at the very beginning, this is the last thing that we're going to consider. Okay, so now we're going to move in to our analysis of Disney's characters, Aurora and Elsa. Okay, what follows are two examples of Disney's failure to offer authentic female role models to young girls. Again, this is a transitional statement that builds together or ties back together this paragraph with the information that follows. Instead of just dropping into the analysis of Aurora, the student is taking the time to explain to the reader, to keep the reader with her, okay, to explain to the reader where she's going and why it makes sense for her to go there now at this point, okay? So this is an example of good transition writing, okay? Here's another example, right? So at the end of the student's analysis of Aurora, okay, she transitions by saying at the very beginning of her next paragraph, unlike Aurora, Disney's newest princess, Elsa, is much more aligned to our current conceptions of femininity and the self, all right? She is, in fact, an ideal representation, powerful and completely in control of her own destiny. Yet, her assertiveness is connected to a deeper vein of selfishness that pervades her character. Okay, so in other words, is this still going to be a negative evaluation? Yes, but it's going to be negative in a different light. Aurora lacked sort of deliberate choice in her characterization, which connects us back to our thesis right here. Elsa lacks what? Service of one's community at the expense of her own comfort, right? So, in other words, right, Elsa is also analyzed in a negative light, but she is slightly different than Aurora, and therefore the student alerts us to that fact and uses this transition to draw the contrast, okay? So obviously each paragraph features a similar kind of connective mortar, a kind of connective tissue, like a cartilage in the essay that binds together each of the parts of its body, all right, and establishes logical relationships between it. Okay, so that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about is transitions. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is source use. Okay, so for both the AP class and the honors and regular class, okay, obviously you need to be able to execute an effective research project that answers the prompt and effectively synthesize textual analysis and secondhand research evidence into coherent persuasive argument. Okay, that is a pretty roundabout way of saying the same thing that the AP course requires. It basically says that you need to do synthesis, and synthesis requires you to consider, explain, and integrate other people's arguments and other people's viewpoints, the intellectual property of other individuals that are cited in your essay, referenced in your essay, into your own argument. Okay, you can draw upon multiple kinds of sources, strategically selecting the most relevant information and combining apt and specific source material as a part of your own argument. Okay, so in other words, right, and you can read through the rest of these standards that are related to synthesis, but essentially, guys, all right, for both classes, you need to conduct synthesis, and as we already know, when it comes to synthesis, the process of synthesis in argumentation is using outside resources to support your own assertion. Right, well, let's think about consciously how the student has done that, okay? Well, the student's basic argument, as we've already seen and we've gone back to many, many times, is here, at the end of the first paragraph in her thesis. Now, how is the student using outside resources and synthesizing those outside resources in order to support her opinion? Well, first and foremost, right, we see in the narration paragraphs her establishing a kind of context, right? Now, she's citing sources. Obviously, I cut out and just summarized this portion of the essay, but she's citing sources that help her have a kind of authoritative summary of what these movements are and how they relate back to our current conceptions of femininity and how that relates to Disney, okay? Then you might want to note the use of this source, right? So these are background resources. Background resources are helpful, okay, but they certainly are less compelling than resources that actually support your points. Like, for example, Okay, when we turn our attention to Disney, before we turn our attention to Disney characters, the writer says that we should understand how much media shapes our daily life. Okay, obviously, it's something that we are immersed in modern technological societies, and children are the most immersed in it. Okay, well, maybe you have great parents who say you can't be immersed in media to this extent. Well, sorry, that isn't true for Americans in general. And according to this study, it would seem that the average child consumes 7.5 hours of media per day. That's a lot of media. And it follows that, right? It follows that if this is true, then these characters are more than no big deal because they have a loud voice, all right, in shaping the self-conceptions of the people that are consuming the messages that are being produced. The point here ultimately is that this source is used by the writer in order to substantiate an important claim in her line of reasoning. Okay, this is a great example of using a synthetic source or synthesizing an outside source into an argument effectively and coherently. Okay, that is precisely what you need to be doing in the course of your own writing. All right. So finally, notice the in-text citations. These in-text citations are connected to the end of text citations in the works cited page. All right, this works cited page should be double-spaced. It should have its own page at the end of the essay, and it summarizes all of the sources that were directly referenced in the course of the essay. Okay, so at some point in the essay, all of these sources were directly quoted from, or paraphrased from, or information from them were summarized in the essay. And so they were cited, okay, they were attributed through the course of the essay. That needs to happen also in your essay, okay? So that is all that we have to do today. I just wanted to point that out to you, talk about some transition, or emphasize the importance of transitions a little bit, and also discuss source use and quote integration. Okay, so you need to make sure that, like we've already discussed, you are integrating your quotes, you are framing those quotations, and you are citing them correctly, and that those citations are connected to end of text citations on a works cited page. Okay, so integrate your quotes correctly. All right, as noted here in the sample essay. Make sure that those sources are used to substantiate and support your assertions. Make sure those assertions are connected to a line of reasoning that is summarized in a central claim that we call a thesis. Okay, make sure that thesis is contentious. All right, and make sure that ultimately your paragraphs offer assertions that are connected to that contentious claim, along with relevant, accurate, and sufficient evidence that is commented on, analyzed through the course of the essay. If you do all those things that I just listed, then you will have a cogent essay that is extremely persuasive and well written. Okay, the only remaining focus points, very simply, have to do with your writing style. Okay, ensuring that you maintain an academic voice, ensuring that you use varied syntax, precise diction to achieve a variety of rhetorical effects in order to convey your points clearly. Okay. Notice finally, you honor students, that I've struck through some of these focus points. I'm not necessarily going to require you to refute a counterclaim or use the classical oration model, and then you are definitely not writing an annotated bibliography. So you can mark those out. And you do not need to worry about those focus points. Okay, and those don't show up on the AP focus points, so we're all good. All right, that's all we have for the day. Hope you guys have an excellent evening.